Will you be my girlfriend with the intention of marrying me? That's what everyone I met through a friend wanted to know. One guy, who was 3 years younger than me, said he fell for me right away. I thought about my age and wanting to settle down, so I said yes. A year later, we tied the knot. I'm Michelle, 34 years old, working for a big company. Living overseas has always been my dream. My husband, Paul, is younger than me, but he's a natural leader and takes charge in our relationship. He's the one who leads our household, and I'm okay with that. I've been used to living alone for a while, so I don't mind doing the chores and cooking. Paul doesn't pitch in much, but I don't find it bothersome. When we're out together, Paul always takes the lead, which lets me relax and have fun without any worries. It feels like a nice balance between us. However, everything changed when my mother passed away while I was working. I got a call from my dad, telling me that my mom's illness had gotten worse and she collapsed. I rushed to the hospital, about 2 hours away, to say my final goodbye. I stayed with my dad to help arrange the funeral. When I called Paul, he said he couldn't leave work on short notice. He didn't come to the wake, and although he made it to the funeral, he wasn't dressed appropriately. I had to quickly arrange a suit for him to rent. He complained a lot, saying I should have sorted everything out beforehand. With all the grief and business, I couldn't deal with Paul's complaints, so I brushed them off. But he didn't seem to appreciate that, and he was in a bad mood the whole time. Since then, it seems like our arguments as a couple have been on the rise. It's normal to have some disagreements after being married for 3 years, but lately, Paul's been picking fights more aggressively. His controlling behavior has been overwhelming, often telling me what to do and taking charge. I grew tired of it and tried standing up to him a few times, but since he didn't know how things were managed around the house, even simple tasks like preparing for his business trips became lengthy affairs. Plus, he'd complain while trying to help, only making more of a mess. Eventually, I realized it was easier if I just handled things myself. It wasn't about blindly obeying him. I took charge of certain tasks to save myself the hassle. I'm going to start preparing for us to join the gathering for my mom's first death anniversary next week, I informed Paul. He responded grumpily, "Okay, but I have an important meeting that day. What should I do?" I've mentioned this gathering well in advance. I was taken aback by his sudden remark. "What? You're not going?" Paul sighed heavily. "It's not that, but it'll be tough to delegate everything to my juniors, you know." He seemed pleased with his recent promotion and often talked about his junior team members. I felt like sighing in return. "Please plan for it, okay?" I emphasized. The day before the gathering, when I got home from work, Paul was sulking and drinking beer in the living room. "I'm sorry I'm late. I had to work overtime," I apologized. I could tell he was upset because I was late and dinner was delayed. "I've been waiting here for an hour just as I thought," he grumbled. "But it's just 1 hour, isn't it?" I reasoned. If he couldn't prepare dinner, he could have gone out to buy something. I had informed him of my late arrival time. He could have taken some initiative and handled things on his own. Suppressing the urge to speak my mind, I handed him a takeout box. I thought it'd take too long if I cooked, so I'd pick this up on my way home instead, I explained. In response, Paul slammed a glass of beer onto the table. "Takeout again? Aren't you slacking off a bit too much lately?" The last time I brought home takeout was about 2 weeks ago. True, I've been busy lately and maybe I haven't been cooking elaborate meals every day. But I always make sure we have a balanced diet and rarely rely on prepackaged items. Still, I didn't think I deserved that kind of criticism. As I debated whether to respond, Paul, misunderstanding something, decided to add insult to injury. "Can't say anything because it's true, huh? Do your chores properly. You've been coming home late lately, claiming you're working overtime. You're probably just out having an affair," Paul shouted. His words ignited a wave of anger that had been simmering inside me. Enough was enough. If you know I'm working late, the least you can do is prepare dinner for us. It's okay if you can't cook. Getting takeout isn't too difficult, is it? I always let you know when I'll be late. And despite being busy, I handle all our household chores. "There's no need for that kind of attitude," I asserted. Paul shot me a glare. "You know what? You're 3 years older than me. I could have married someone in their 20s, but I chose you, an older woman. Show some appreciation and do as I say. No one else would want you, so you'd be in trouble if I left, wouldn't you? Did he really just say that? I was furious and couldn't hold back any longer. Then maybe you should have married a younger woman when we started dating before we got married. I asked if you were okay with me being older, and you said yes. That's why we got married. Even without you, I could manage my life, I retorted. Paul scoffed at my words. Whatever, let's get a divorce. With that, he grabbed his beer and the takeout box and stormed off to his room. We had arguments before, but this was a first. I was done with him. I decided to eat my takeout dinner to calm my nerves, assuming Paul was probably just irritated because he was hungry. But even as I filled my stomach, I couldn't shake off the disbelief that this was all happening the day before my mother's first death anniversary. After a while, I called out to Paul from outside his room, "We need to leave by 8 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 7. There was no response, but I sensed he was awake. With those words said, I went to bed, feeling unsettled. The next morning, when I woke up early, Paul was already gone. The bags I had packed were still in the room, indicating he hadn't left for the gathering without me. Where had he disappeared to? I called his cell, but got no answer. My texts went unanswered too. Left with no other option, I left a voicemail and began getting ready to head out alone. I managed to reach Paul while waiting at the train station. I have to go to my meeting. I can't leave it to my juniors, after all, was all he said before the call abruptly ended. Overwhelmed by a mix of anger and resignation, I found myself in a state of stunned confusion. Before I could process it further, the train arrived, carrying luggage for two, but I boarded alone. When I arrived at my father's house, he anxiously inquired, "Where's Paul?" Seeing my father's sadness since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile and replied, "Sorry, he got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come here, but he recently got a promotion, and it sounded urgent, so I suggested he prioritize that." My father nodded understandingly. "I see. He's working hard. It's a shame I couldn't see him, but your mother would understand. Let him know he's always welcome to visit." Though his words stung a bit, I kept up the smile throughout the day. With no word from Paul, the night passed without any contact from either of us. Planning to stay overnight and return home the next day as originally intended, I felt a bit childish for not reaching out to him. Maybe I'd cook his favorite dish, hamburgers, tomorrow to make amends. With that thought, I went to bed. The next day, after leaving my father's house and arriving home around noon, I decided to drop off my bags before heading to the grocery store. As expected, dirty laundry was strewn around the living room, a sign that Paul still hadn't grasped how to use the washing machine. Sighing, I gathered the laundry and tossed it into the washer along with my own. Taking a break and returning to the living room, something on the table caught my eye. As I got closer, disbelief washed over me. There, sitting on the table, were divorce papers, already signed by Paul. Why? I stared at the papers, bewildered. Was this his way of asking for a divorce? Pulling out my cell phone from my bag, I realized it should be Paul's lunch break. I wasn't sure if Paul would answer, but to my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. "Paul, what's the deal with these divorce papers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end, Paul laughed. "What do you mean?" "It's pretty straightforward. I don't want an older wife who won't do her share of household chores. That's why I've decided on a divorce. If we split, I can find someone younger and more appealing. After all, a wife is like a status symbol, isn't she? It's hard to boast about you being older when my colleagues ask. Dodging the topic isn't exactly simple." I was speechless, utterly lost for words. If you don't want a divorce, then start pulling your weight around the house. I'll be home as usual today, so make sure to grab some beer, all right? But if you're set on this, take the divorce papers to the family court. "The ball's in your court," he said before hanging up abruptly. The call left me stunned, unable to utter a single word. It seemed Paul believed his ultimatum would force me to comply. All this time, I'd done the chores not out of fear of him leaving, but because I disliked having to ask him. He likely assumed otherwise. presuming my compliance stemmed from a fear of abandonment, given his dominant nature. Being married to a younger man might draw envy from others, but in reality, there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. I often found myself emphasizing his age, but truth be told, he's quite average in appearance, personality, and income. Describing him as younger was simply convenient. Initially, the age gap concerned me, but now that we're both in our 30s with only a 3-year difference, it feels insignificant. Had the gap been wider, perhaps I feel differently, but constantly being labeled as the older wife when we're essentially peers feels disheartening. I grabbed my bag and made a beeline for the family court. As I handed in the divorce papers, a wave of relief washed over me. Despite thinking we were doing okay, it's clear things are over now. But I can manage without Paul. With that realization, a weight lifted off my shoulders, prompting me to reach out to my boss and request a few days of paid leave. Luckily, work had just eased up, so he granted me about a week off. Now that I'm divorced, it's time to sort out my belongings. Thankfully, I didn't have much to begin with, so tidying up was a breeze. I stashed the larger items in a storage unit, packed my essentials and clothes into the car, and on a whim, decided to head to a hot spring resort. It seemed like the off-season for hotels, so I managed to snag a cheap room on the spot. The thrill of the drive filled me with excitement. As I soaked in the hot springs and lounged in my room, my phone suddenly rang. "Michelle, I asked you to pick up beer, didn't I? Where are you?" I couldn't help but chuckle, recalling Paul's usual routine. "I'm actually at a hot spring resort right now," I replied. "What? A hot spring resort? Why?" Paul's confusion was evident in his voice. "Well, you did say to file the divorce papers if I disagreed with you," I reminded him, amused at the thought of his reaction. "Wait, you actually filed them?" Paul sounded flustered. "Of course I did." "Why? Is something wrong?" "After all, it was your suggestion." Paul finally regained his composure. "Are you serious? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If that's the case, I'll grab dinner, so just come home soon." His sudden caring tone made me laugh even more. "It's about an hour-and-a-half drive. They even have an outdoor natural hot spring. It's quite lovely. I wonder if it'll rain tomorrow. Since you're going out to buy your own dinner, I've already packed up my things so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Please take care of yourself," Paul pleaded desperately, hoping I would reconsider. But I had no intention of returning. "You're the one who initiated the divorce papers, remember?" It was clear he was using the threat of divorce to manipulate me. "I've already told you I can manage without you. Now that you've divorced your older wife, you can find someone younger. Whether you succeed or not is up to you." Paul fell silent. "It might not be my place, but you should consider moving out of that apartment," I continued. Finally, Paul spoke up again. "Why should I?" His voice was barely audible. "Think about your finances. You'll end up broke if you keep living there. You can't handle chores, cooking, or laundry. You'll need to hire help and eat out, right? That's costly. It would be problematic if most of your salary went toward rent. You always thought you were the one providing for me, but my salary is nearly double yours. You've never been the provider. If anything, it's been the opposite. And that confidence you had because of that one junior. I have multiple juniors under me and even more under them. I usually keep work talk to myself because Paul gets moody, but I outrank him both in position and salary. You'd think he'd have noticed by now, living together and all, but it seems like it's news to him. Maybe Paul, being the proud, dominant man he is, kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that he can't, he must be feeling quite defeated. I've dealt a blow to this pride, payback for all these years. As for why I handled the household chores without complaint, even when you acted domineering, it was partly because you were younger and I cut you some slack, and partly because it was too much hassle to ask anything of you. I didn't need you to stay with me. I was just handling your needs alongside my own chores. So when you said, "Do the chores or we divorce," it was an easy choice. We're strangers now. Goodbye. I said my piece and hung up the phone. Feeling rejuvenated, I savored the hotel's cuisine. As anticipated, Paul reached out for reconciliation, but I responded with a smile. I'm older than you. I doubt you want me back. Apparently, he hadn't fared well with younger women. Eventually, Paul gave up and moved out of the apartment. Engaging a lawyer for asset division, I demanded more to compensate for the burden of household chores I had endured. Paul, being thrifty, didn't hire legal representation, giving me the upper hand. With my lawyer's assistance, we negotiated an agreement with favorable terms for me. Interestingly, it appears Paul's lone junior had been vocal about his poor leadership skills, to the extent that he couldn't even consider him a competent boss. Paul caught wind of this, and they are now embroiled in a dispute. He should have realized the importance of nurturing his own team. As for me, I had been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. Initially hesitant due to the circumstances and out of consideration for Paul, I finally decided to seize the opportunity. I'm currently gearing up for the transition. Though I've caused my father some concern, we've begun practicing video calls to stay connected when I'm abroad. I'm thrilled to pursue the career I've dreamed of since childhood. It's time to give it my all.